Hello everyone, welcome to Vestiges of History, where we tell of storied lives. My name is Dylan. Remember that scene from the beginning of Patton where he's giving that speech where he says,
30 years from now, when you're sitting around your fireside with your grandson on your knee, and he asks you, what did you do in the Great World War II?
Well, the story I have for you today, this guy probably wins, because he holds the goldfish, the caterpillar, and the winged boot, and is the only veteran of World War II to receive all three. Let's hit the silk and tell of the storied life of Colonel David C. Besbris, B-17 Navigator. There are several vestiges in this collection to tell this story. And Besbris's model 1941 field jacket had his name and serial number stenciled into the lining. It's strange to see an officer with an enlisted jacket making this extra cool. And it is in excellent condition, except for some staining and some storage wear, and probably from living in the bottom of an overseas bag. This Navigator's Dead Reckoning kit with maps and tools is also in excellent condition and probably complete, although I'm not an expert in this particular piece of equipment. The maps are all wartime and depict the eastern seaboard. And finally, this parachute harness with an airborne first aid packet tied to it. It's unopened and still has the morphine syringe, which is incredibly rare. And, top that off, here's a photo of him wearing it. And a letter from Robert Ripley from Ripley's Believe It or Not. More on that later. David Charles Besbris was born in Connecticut in 1919. He spent most of his youth in Massachusetts, around Bristol and Taunton. He was raised in the Jewish faith. When America entered World War II, Besbris was rejected from military service from the U.S. Army Air Corps in 1941. He then crossed the border into Canada and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in November of 42. In the spring of 43, he was transferred to the U.S. Army Air Forces and graduated as a navigator on 11 March. He left for Scotland on 2 July 1943 to join the 407th Bomb Squadron of the 92nd Bomb Group at RAF Alconbury. His first combat mission was 24 July 1943. The target was Norway, which was the first time the American contingent of the air war had targeted that nation. His subsequent missions included raids over Hanover, Kassel, the Ruhr Valley, France, and Schweinfurt. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid of 17 August 1943 was a particularly costly mission that became the stuff of hellish legend, and rightfully so. 60 B-17s were shot down, 5 fighters acting as bomber escort were lost, and nearly 100 other bombers returned to England heavily damaged. In the human cost, there were 7 KIA, 21 wounded in action, and 557 MIA or presumed taken prisoner. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission is where Besbris received his first Purple Heart when he got hit with shrapnel in the thigh, one of those 21 airmen wounded in action. On 6 September 1943, Lieutenant Besbris flew his 12th raid, this time over Stuttgart. Shortly after leaving the target area, 50 German fighters intercepted and attacked the bomber formation. His ship successfully shot down 4 German aircraft, one of which is credited to Besbris from his nose gun position. Due to low fuel, the crew was forced to ditch in the English Channel, 5 miles off the coast of Le Havre. Their flying fortress sank in 90 seconds. Amazingly, the entire crew made it out but were still floating in the English Channel. After many hours in the water, the crew sighted 4 ships and began to fire flares. This was a risky move. Those ships could have been German. Lieutenant Besbris lost consciousness as the boat approached and woke up to see French doctors looking over him. Those sailors that picked them up, thankfully, were Free French forces serving under the British Royal Navy. This is where Besbris received his goldfish. On 16 November 1943, Besbris's B-17 flagship participated in another raid over Norway. This target were the molybdenum mines at Naben. Molybdenum is a very valuable mineral because it's used in the tempering of steel that is very favorable for weapons production. A massive daylight bombing raid of 130 B-17s, which dropped 711 bombs, caused extensive damage, but the majority of those bombs missed the target. Besbris's B-17, nicknamed Flagship, crashed in a Norwegian forest after having its engines knocked out by anti-aircraft fire. Besbris was forced to bail out at 16,000 feet during this raid and landed in the mountainous terrain, which got him enrolled in the Caterpillar Club. He successfully evaded the Gestapo and other German forces for 93 days through assistance from local resistance groups and agents of the Special Operations Executive. He was ferreted from house to house, mostly on foot. It was during his time on the run that Besbris learned how to ski, purely out of necessity, because if he didn't, he and his helpers would have found themselves in the middle of a blizzard in Norway, where it gets cold. He was not just evading the enemy, he was evading nature. Now, during the research, I discovered that Besbris consistently flew missions while wearing his talent under his flight gear. And when he landed in Norway, the first thing he did was remove the talent and bury it under a rock. Now, for those that may not know, the talent is a Jewish prayer shawl that is worn over the shoulders and has the fringe. The dedication and patriotism of these Norwegian resistance fighters cannot be understated. It is also important to know that they were able to successfully forge traveling papers for him so that he would be able to cross into Sweden. Besbris eventually escaped into Sweden on 17 February 1945. And he would later learn the other 9 members of his crew bailed out successfully, but were captured and became prisoners of war. He finally found his way to English soil and military control in mid-March of 1945. He is believed to be the first American airman to successfully escape and evade the enemy in Norway on foot. Hence the Winged Boot. After his triumphant return to military control in England, Pine Tree, the code name for 8th Bomber Command at High Wycombe, decided that his war was over. I think they took mercy on him. He had seen enough. Now, he was a successful navigator, very competent in his job, but also maybe some bad luck? They sent him back to the United States and gave him a desk job in New Rochelle, New York, where he trained WWII recruits on the East Coast. Upon his return to the U.S., Robert Ripley of Ripley's Believe It or Not reached out to inform Besbris that he had won $100 for being the only man in the war to receive the Caterpillar for the Caterpillar Club, the Goldfish for ditching in the water, and the Winged Boot for escaping and evading capture in a hostile country on foot. Now, incoming nerd tangent. These were never actually recognized awards from the US government, or the military in general. These awards were custom British made at a certain shop in London, but came from the fraternity, for lack of a better term, for airmen. These awards acted like a shibboleth to let other flyers know that you were a real one, or rather, what you had been able to survive. There is much evidence of the cross-cultural exchange between American airmen stationed in England and their British counterparts regarding uniforms and decorations and how they were worn, but that is another video for another day. Anyway, back to the story. He was featured in Ripley's Believe It or Not comic strip in every syndicated paper across the United States. The United States Army Air Forces recognized him as the only man in the service to successfully bail out of a plane with a parachute, successfully survive ditching in the water, and evading the enemy on foot. There is somewhere a portrait of Besbris that was in this special gallery showing of the high brass of the 8th Air Force in England. I'm actively trying to find that portrait and see if it still exists. He was considered, for lack of a better term, culturally significant to the history and culture of the 8th Air Force. Colonel Besbris was discharged from the Air Force on 30 November 1946, and after the Korean conflict, he would re-enlist in the Air Force in January of 1952, but was discharged again in January of 1953. Colonel Besbris started a family and lived in Southern California, where he passed away in 1993. So, my big question is, why isn't this a movie yet? He was either extremely lucky or extremely unlucky, just like Joe Toy getting fragged twice at Breakcourt Manor in Band of Brothers.
Joe! Jesus Christ. Fucking twice.
I can imagine how often his kids and grandkids had to hear this story, and sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, believe it or not. Thank you for sharing this time with me today. I want to thank my subscribers for their patience with me as I develop these stories and these videos. This year is going to be righteously huge for the channel, and I think you're going to want to stick around for what's coming because it's going to be insane. I am beyond fortunate to be able to share these stories with y'all. I am so excited to make these videos for you guys and share these amazing stories. Now, please like, share, and subscribe. Do the whole thing. But please, share this story where you think it will do the most good. And as always, you never know who will tell your story. Live a storied life. Thank you.